Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with Graham Reed and Antonia Landy. This is my second take on this, so it's absolutely fine. Antonia, how are you doing today?
I'm still very well, Graham. Thank
Good
you.
stuff, yes. Today, and I'm going to get this right this time, we are joined by Simonetta Batteiger, founder and coach at Inclusive Leaders, Product Tank Cologne organizer, and darling of the product speakers circuit at the moment. Welcome, Simonetta. How are you?
Happy to be here.
Fantastic. I was, as we were just speaking before we started recording, I was overjoyed to hear Simon speak at MTP Con London a few weeks back, all around ethics and trust of products and product management. Really, really excited to have you on the show today. Before we really dive into all of this, which is our big topic for today, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm going to start in a fun place. I actually don't come from product originally. I started my career in finance. I was a controller, I was an accountant, I was a director of finance. I then went to sales. I then went to product and then stayed in product for a long time. But I think it's important, especially as we're talking about this topic of trust and trustworthiness and its business impact and the business case of ROI of AI, all of these things. I think it's good to know that my background is actually coming from the numbers side. And then as a female in tech, I've had numerous experiences of what it's like to be the only female in the room. So it sharpened my understanding around things like what makes a high performing team, what makes psychological safety happen, how does trust play a role, how does inclusivity play a role, how do ethics and high performing teams and business results relate. And this is all kind of like coming together in my current thinking about why trustworthiness is such an important part to get right as we're building AI product experiences. And that's what I've been talking about at the product in London, where I brought in the ethics side of it, the trustworthiness side of it, but then also kind of made a clear argument of how this relates to business impact and ROI.
I mean, that's perfect segue into what we're talking about today, and I think it's really is two parts to that same piece there. Overall, that trust piece, that the ethics piece of what we're doing, what we're building, but importantly, it's and certainly bringing in your your financial background, which is from a product perspective. I wouldn't say well, it is a little unusual, but it's also a part that is well known for product people to really struggle with is to look at the financial impact of what they're doing on the business, even on the world. And so the kind of the title for today was really very simple: money, money, money. And let's dive straight into that. So, Melissa, I think the first question is why is this such a hard topic for product folks in your experience?
I feel like a lot of product people don't come into product the way I did with a clear understanding of how the numbers work. They rise the ranks and come into product from an engineering background, from a UX design background, from all kinds of other fields background, some of them also from business, but not necessarily with the hands-on experience of creating the financials, creating the P&L, discussing the budget, discussing the P&L, discussing the balance sheet, discussing M&A deal considerations with executives. And it's a little bit of a foreign land concept when you are mostly focused on concepts like what is an empowered team? How do I get discovery right? How do I find out from my customers what it even is that they want? Obviously, whatever a customer buys from us, this is where all our revenue is coming from. So by focusing on this customer desire fulfillment piece, we're kind of indirectly always kind of working on revenue too. But making this a conscious connection and being able to really speak about this and narrating your decision making around priorities in the language of money to executives is something that product people oftentimes are just not very used to and therefore not very skilled at, but is not rocket science. It can absolutely be learned. It's actually quite simple. There's only four ways in which you can impact profitability. You make revenue go up, you protect that same revenue, you make costs go smaller, or you avoid spending money to begin with. Those are the four main levers of how you impact profitability. And so once you have understood that, it becomes quite easy to look at this initiative you have in your roadmap and try to come up with a good enough guesstimate of what its business impact might be. It's just not something that we had to do a lot in product for many, many years. tech organizations that employed professional product people had only like one trajectory, growth and upwards. And in that context, you didn't have to justify your existence as hard. Things just kept growing. Money was free. And as a result, you didn't have to focus on profitability as much. You didn't have to argue as hard about what am I spending my expensive team resources on. And even with the AI thing now, I find this development quite funny because the AI became the shiny new thing. Everyone said, let's be AI first. Let's do everything AI. Like, let's learn this and the money will come. And we're at this point in time where budgets continue to be tight and executives are being asked to show the money, the return on investment and all these AI initiatives, and they are really struggling with it. There's enough research around this by now as well, how the majority of AI initiatives fail, which, to be fair, was true for any other initiative too before the advent of AI. But I think the focus right now is really on how can we actually translate our AI initiatives into something that has business impact, and then the same strategies that always governed how you look at profitability apply here too. Like, you still have to create revenue, you still have to be cost conscious. Now there's some changes in the mechanics of AI products where used to be you built a deterministic software, and if it was a SaaS software, extra users just let you scale for more or less free, very little extra cost per extra user or usage. And that's changing with AI products. So the whole unit metric logic is changing. You have running margin risk as you scale up and users keep using your AI feature. You have to keep paying money and or start to find that break even point where it makes sense to self-host. All of these are financial considerations, right? And all of these, in my mind, belong into the wheelhouse of a product person that makes decisions together with their peers in engineering about how to set this up so it can actually show a profit to the company. And that's where we're finding ourselves now. And it's quite fascinating for me to see how teams are starting to look at this and trying to make sense of it. And yeah, that's what I've been working with and doing courses around and speaking about in the last months and years.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like, I really want to emphasize, for folks who maybe stepped into tech in the last 5, 6 years, money really used to be free. Like, and the only goal really was expansion. It really was growth. In a lot of cases, growth at all costs, right? If you have to spend money to make money, that was totally fine. That was just part and parcel of the job. And it's very interesting. We also saw this in product operations, right? Like, somebody wants a new tool? Sure, get it. Whatever. We'll figure out the balance sheet at the end of the year. And then suddenly, things started contracting. Suddenly it wasn't growth, suddenly it was profitability. That was the big main metric. And suddenly we actually had to look at, wait a minute, what are we actually spending all this money on? What are we getting in return for it, right? From our tooling, but also from the people that we employ. And I think that's when it started becoming a lot more obvious that this kind of should always have been part of our role in product management, but also in product ops. But then it started becoming really, really acute. And I think exactly as you say, Simonetta, AI tooling and AI integration into products hasn't created new problems, but it has exacerbated the problems that have always existed.
And there's one other thing that touches on this ethics and trustworthiness and AI topic. We used to always be able to rely on the moral compass of humans that are making decisions because all decisions in a product org were made by humans. It was a product manager deciding what should be built. It was a designer that put together the user experience. It was an engineer that programmed something. And along the way, every one of the people who had their hands on this solution obviously employed their moral compass to the decision making, understanding that certain things are no goes and other things are okay to build, understanding also, maybe rudimentary so, but still implicit, what is the strategy of this organization, what falls within the scope of what we're doing here and what doesn't. Now you have agentic decision makers in the fold in this new AI world, and they need specific context. If you cannot make explicit what's part of our strategy, who's our ideal customer profile, what is a trustworthy result, how do I govern for trustworthy AI outputs, all of these things need specific explicit ruling for an AI agent because they don't have a moral conscience. They cannot actually really think. They're just very good statistical prediction machines that oftentimes, based on language input, give decent enough language output, but it doesn't mean they comprehend at all what they're doing. And we're starting to see the first very public fails around these things that cost companies real money. And that is where I find it interesting. And it's also, it is up to us in product as we're designing these experiences together with our peers in engineering and design to come up with ways to be explicit and specific about the positive impact we want to create. Because agents need goals that they can optimize towards. If they don't have an explicit description of what they should be, what good looks like, they cannot optimize for it. And it asks a very different skill set of product people out of a sudden, because all these things that we used to have implicit in the back of our minds as moral compass, as our understanding of strategy and direction, as our understanding of user empathy and product sense, now has to be verbalized and put in place as context for agents, because otherwise, guess what? These agents do whatever they want. Whatever the foundation model underlying mean and statistical most relevant experience is would be spit out, and that's never good enough for us to stand out and be truly fitting to the customer progress that we make our money with, right? Why would customers keep giving us money for something they could just have for free by asking Claude Code or whatever other tool a very simple question?
We've covered quite a lot there. We could, and I'd love to dive into a lot of this. But I want to bring two things together. Antonio, what you were saying earlier about kind of the change in thought about money over the last 5 years, and how that now ties into something else on the surface quite separate, but the rapid rise of AI, and it's around the tools and our product teams equipped to deal with this rate of change. And I want to go back about 4 or 5 years now. So when I was at a company called Cobalt, exactly the same thing that you described, Antonio, about, money was no object. We can have whatever tools we want. And actually my role in Product Ops was then suddenly became very, very different, because we had the big tech layoff of 2022 sort of time, 2023, I think it was. And all of a sudden, everything was scrutinized. We then had to kind of, contract all the tools that we were using back down. Money suddenly became a thing, not just in the world of product ops. So that was a big sudden shift for a lot of us. But actually in then product teams then accounting for almost too much, almost micromanage. How much is this feature going to be worth to our customers? Can we put a number on this feature, on this task in Jira, on whatever it is we want to do? Suddenly flipped. I've just finished reading Rich Mironov's Money Stories book, which I'm going to refer to a couple of times in this podcast. And he really dives into this particular point as well. How finance has taken on a very interesting face, I think, within tech businesses. Always kind of having been there, but then suddenly wanting to dive onto how much is that worth and how much is that worth, and almost kind of overstepping how much rigor and thought on this there is, and actually something we need to backtrack on. So that's certainly one piece. Then we move into the AI world. Everybody's scrambling with this. Everybody's struggling with this, about the rate of change with this as well. And I think fundamentally on both these points, our product managers, our product teams, equipped to deal right now with this rate of change on those two areas, with finance, with AI, something that isn't traditionally in the product manager's handbook. We're not necessarily equipped to deal with this as on our own. And are we asking a lot from these folks to upskill so quickly?
Yeah. Before I let you answer, Simonetta, I think I'd like to make the point here. I don't think we ever successfully managed to make the first transition. I don't think we ever really successfully managed to integrate this financial acumen enough into our product teams before the AI wave came along. And suddenly, yeah, we're still kind of talking about cost, but also not really, because now building's totally free, you guys. And like, it feels a bit like cognitive dissonance a lot of the time.
It kind of
Where,
feels like we started, and then AI
right,
hit, and we went, oh, it's all free again now, so let's just go for it. And now we're suddenly going, oh my god, actually no, now we need to rein in the finances
right,
because we realise this is now money again.
correct.
Well, I kind of agree with Christian Idiote and the keynote. He also delivered both at Mind the Product as well as at Product at Heart this year, where he very specifically called out that product roles have always been in service of the business. We may have not been asked this so directly, and there are many things that I don't like in the way Marty Kagan attacks the product owner role, for example, right? I don't think it's helpful, but I think he does have a point in if you're only thinking about managing a backlog, you're missing the point of what your role is because your role and your team is expected to deliver a return on investment for your company. If your team that easily costs in the neighborhood of 600,000 to a million per year is not delivering at least that much value in return, why should the company keep employing you? And product people have been really, really bad at narrating a story about why they should exist, what the value it is that they're creating. We're seen as expensive cost centers. We definitely show up as a expense in the P&L on the as an R&D expense. And when you ask the average executive in a company that isn't like super product built, what they perceive to be as the value drivers in the organization, chances are they would nominate and name sales and marketing and not necessarily product. And a part of this is because we have just been so busy doing our product activities that sound very complex and are having all these frameworks and things, and they never speak about the value that we actually bring to our organization. So I'm super pleased that you mentioned Rich Mironov's Money Story book. I recommend this to everybody right now. I've been gifting it to people. It actually came out of me hosting Rich and a couple other product people for a whole track on business skills at Product Management Festival last year in the fall. That's where we really started working on this money stories concept and how it relates to profitability and everything. And then he published the book. So it it's always been about creating business outcomes for your organization. If you have and also it's always been true if you're capable to narrate how what your team's doing builds a revenue growth story, you are starting to be trusted and seen as value drivers, and that goes way beyond justifying this one feature here or there. I would actually say if you're thinking about it this way, you haven't understood what the real ask is, because oftentimes it's not about this one feature, it's about the entire company's P&L is expected to move a certain direction, right? And also to your point, Antonia, about for a while it was all only on revenue growth and not as much focus on profitability, that's actually directly related to how cheap money was. Because VCs could just continue to inject money into any kind of company in their portfolio, basically for free, because it cost them nothing to raise the money because interest rates were so low. And once that flipped and money no longer was free, the whole focus on ARR and revenue only growth at whatever expense kind of went away, and the focus went back to where it actually has been for centuries. When you look at how accounting works and how businesses work, is that at the end of the day, if the business doesn't run a profit, you don't have a successful, sustainable business. Investors have always understood this. Shareholders understand this. Most executives understand this. But in the way we spoke about success as product people who we admired, who went on LinkedIn and told their amazing ARR growth story, it always failed to mention, and what is the actual profitability part of this? What is the EBITDA looking like? How am I creating value for my organization in a sustainable fashion? But any big org is looking at that like a hawk. And they've returned their focus to those basics now that money is no longer free. And product people seem to be surprised by that, which really is to some degree on us, because you should not expect to be paid a high salary with nothing to show for in return. That it simply doesn't work that way, right? Your personal budget doesn't work that way. You cannot keep spending money on things in excess of how much you're making. And a company doesn't work any other way, right? They can only pay their people with the money that the company is making in terms of revenue. And there is an expectation how margin stays stable and how there is some sort of growth. And we have to contribute into that. Otherwise, the logical consequence is that people are taking a look at the cost side of things and they're culling some people out. And that's where I'm coming from when I'm trying to teach people about these commercial skills and a way to think about this, and a way to think about, you should be creating at least 5 to 7x of what you're costing in benefit to your company in a year. That doesn't mean that every sprint you deliver huge value, but on average, over the course of 1 year, if you're not shooting for 5 to 7x of what you cost your org, and you cannot tell a story around this, your job is at risk. You don't want that. So be proactive about it.
But this is exactly the sort of skills and the teaching that I think is needed. And it's a really, really interesting thing to look back over the past 15 years, because kind of in the 2010s, like we said, the money was not, didn't have a value realistically, interest rates were so low. And this is how so many of the now big businesses were able to raise huge amounts of money, continue for years and years and years without making a profit. We're constantly making a loss and still, growing millions, billions of users and followers and things like that. And then we've had this big switch, big change because of those interest rates changing. Then everything then changed. The way the businesses changed. This has had a knock-on effect to how people hire and things like that. That's all well documented. But our mindset shift, I don't think, has changed. And Tony, you touched upon this. If you've been in tech longer than this, you'll have seen that big shift. If you haven't, and you've come into tech in the past 3-4 years, you won't necessarily have appreciated that. And it's a completely different mindset of that people, professionals in our industry will have. So it's really, really great that people like yourself, Simonetta, are taking this on. I don't see it very often about, we need to appreciate the way that money does really impact our business and has to impact how we think about building our products and operating in the product space.
Yeah,
I think to bring
absolutely.
it back to the ethical concepts, right? I do also think that there is a place for you to do something cool impact-wise in the world that also makes you good money, right? Because sometimes I feel like there's this misconception in people's heads that somehow earning money is a dirty thing. You can only do it by abusing users. You can only do it by extracting more value than you can. The whole word enshittification is kind of like the emblematic coined term around this, right? There are other ways to run your business. There are better ways to create value sustainably. And I am super happy that Eric Ries's most recent book, Incorruptible, is also picking this up, is telling a lot of stories how sustainable success in businesses has been built on top of trust, has been built on top of treating people right, has been built on creating good culture and relentlessly serving customers in a way that delights them. Nasreen's work comes to mind on product delight. All of these things are puzzle pieces for how you intentionally create good, positive product outcome in a trustworthy fashion so that users are delighted to hand over their money. And with that comes your revenue story. So it's not a contradiction to make money and do something positive in the world. I feel like that's something that I've even faced in my last organization myself, right? We were building ad filtering software, and the start of the org was very privacy centered, very engineering centered, very user centered. let's stick it up for the user and stick it to those orgs that make money with advertising by blocking their stuff, right? The business model was around filtering out the most egregious user abuse in terms of pop-ups and things like that, but leaving acceptable ads in place. And with that, that was the funding source of the entire organization. There was a clear split in people's mind in the org that the engineers were building these cool ad filtering features for users were the good guys, and the business people were the dark side, like the dirty people. Like we kind of have to accept that they exist, but we don't like them. And I never understood this. It's really actually made me mad because I don't think it's a split thing. We both together created this success. If there would have not been a revenue source coming in, the whole thing wouldn't have existed. And I think there is numerous examples of companies being super successful with making a very useful product happen and not doing anything evil in the world, actually truly sticking to this principle of creating great user value over and over and over. So for me, I want to, if I could wave a magic wand and get rid of this like strange idea that somehow revenue growth and business success is dirty or wrong or can only be done based on some undesirable, morally questionable tactics towards users, I would love to get rid of that because it's simply not true.
Yeah, and like this is why I always have to laugh when I see yet another LinkedIn post or article or whatever denouncing the death of product management, because like we are just getting back to basics. Like this is the fundamentals. Build something that helps people achieve something and do that in so delightful a way that they want to part with their money, right? That's the thing. It doesn't have to be, like you say, it doesn't have to be underhanded, or we're not tricking people, right, into giving us their money, even though they have absolutely no need or reason for it. And I think especially now, and okay, we are in a bubble. Not everybody will be building their own apps, right? Very clearly stating that for the record. But the people who can, they will still need goods, services, digital products for things. And as product companies, it's our job to serve them with those goods, services, digital products in a way that makes people want to pay us. That is the job. That is the fundamentals of product management.
While you were just talking, I just did a quick LinkedIn search. There were 7 articles today published that are titled "The Death of Product Management."
Of course.
Here we are.
Here we are. It's a really interesting piece that you were talking about. Both of you kind of talking about there, but you were talking about kind of referencing Nisreen, on Delight. Huge fan of her work. She's a previous podcast guest for us as well. And kind of is that at odds with kind of making money? Ultimately just getting the revenue. Is that a blocker to that? And I think we've kind of previously established, no, it's not at all. But it is hard. It's harder to do. And so my question then is to both of you is that it becomes a bit more of a business decision, a business choice to do the right thing, to do good, to provide great products that do good, as opposed to something that fundamentally product teams themselves with some autonomy can do. I'll put that out there and challenge me on that.
You can go first. You can choose to not do it. If you consciously choose to not do this and you have your reasons for it, you will see the experiment results in terms of how your users interact with you, right? But I do think there is enough evidence that if you do get the user experience right, and people are actually delighted and positively happy about your product, right? You go back again to a very basic fundamental principle of what is product market fit, right? You want the customer who desperately loves your product so much so that they tell 5 other people about it and say, you've got to try this because it's fantastic. What are the chances that you get this super excited customer if you're just delivering something average that has no wow factor, that has no delight moment in it, that has no reason for your client to be so in love with your product that they will tell all their buddies about it. This is a growth engine in the core definition of this like super old concept of product market fit, right? Again, a very, very basic product principle thing that we can use. And by the way, word of mouth marketing is free. So it cuts through the barrage of advertisements we're being hit with that are trying to pitch products to us that we don't know whether or not we can trust them or whether or not they're a good value for our money. So again, I do think it's a choice you should be making to think about how can you actually positively delight your users? What is it that you're really solving for them? And in that regard, it kind of goes back to something that I think product people have been getting more sharp around in the last years is all of the thinking around discovery, all of the thinking around jobs to be done, to really be crystal clear on why is it that someone wants my product so badly? What else could I be doing to totally delight them around this progress desire that they have? Because that is and will continue to be the reason why someone gives us their money. And with that continues to be the explaining factor for how we can sustainably create and retain revenue, right? Because especially if you have a product that is built around subscription or usage, you will only keep having revenue if people keep paying you. And if people have a reason to no longer want to pay you, like, for example, when Anthropic said to the US government, no automatic targeting systems with us, and OpenAI said, guess what? We're okay with that. Lots of people changed their subscription to Anthropic, right? Is a real, tangible, immediate business risk tied to ethical consideration where some people say this drives with my values and this one doesn't. And so there are these very concrete ways how your actions and your decisions impact how much people keep trusting you to give you their money. Look at the geopolitical scale right now. For many, many years, you could quite easily rely on and trust that if you bought a solution from a US provider, it will continue to be serviced to you as long as you keep giving them their money, and there's no real business risk tied to this. For the first time in the last 3 or 4 years, we're starting to see signs that this might not be true, right? We have seen the ways how Microsoft was forced to pull their services from judges in the International Criminal Court because the US government didn't agree with the politics of that judge. We have seen how Fable was told that, or Anthropic was told to no longer serve Fable to foreigners because we want to keep this within the bounds of our country. And who says that a government elsewhere might not make a choice? And it's not just about the US government, right? The Chinese government may make similar choices too, forcing companies in their jurisdiction to do certain things, right? Out of a sudden, we have this factor of, can I trust this service provider? Can I trust that I can build my business on this solution and it will keep running? So there's like real considerations. I have never in my life seen so many European companies seriously consider what are European alternatives to these other systems. I've heard anecdotally from someone who said that they were talking to MasterCard, and MasterCard was trying to say to them, your contract is with this European entity, therefore, like, we're not an American player, don't worry about the sovereignty piece. Like, so even US companies are starting to realize that there's something cooking in the way European companies are viewing their services, and it's all around trust, right? So forget about the names that I just named. I find the dynamic underlying interesting, because if you could trust that service would never get cut based on political considerations or whatever, this wouldn't be your worry, right? If you have to start thinking about, can I keep running my business if my access to Microsoft product gets pulled? Can I keep running my business if my access to US payment providers gets pulled? You start to think about business risk completely differently. And I find this actually quite sad because I think for many, many, many years, there was a global desire to make global trade easier, more seamless, more connected, more together. And it's kind of fracturing right now. And underneath that fracturing is the topic of trust. And it keeps popping up everywhere. It keeps popping up in you want a high performing team, you want psychological safety, you need to have trust in the team. You want customers' money. If they don't trust you, they will not give you their money anymore. It's everywhere. And I find this really quite fascinating these days. Like, how can you also then build trustworthiness in AI into a solution that isn't capable to make good moral judgments? So how do you instruct the system to still give trustworthy output? There's some work on that I've been referencing in my talk in London as well from Laura Stewart Muller that actually goes into like governance principles and actual hands-on things you can do to build trustworthiness into AI product experiences. And I think a lot of teams will start looking at these kind of things because if you don't do this, you risk that something comes out that is completely outside of the scope of what you imagined your system would be doing, and it might be quite dangerous for your bottom line.
Let's move on to that topic now before any other government red flags on this episode suddenly get fired up. We just talked about. We do love our American overlords. So let's move on to this kind of whole piece on AI and trust. You know, there's a big running theme of trust across this whole episode. And in your talk at Minor Products, you know, you really dived into kind of the ethics side of using AI. I'd love to just kind of get a bit of a snapshot of that for our audience.
Yeah, spoke about how, and I'm observing the world right now around the topic of AI. Amazing promise, right? I'm a huge fan. I'm using AI all the time for all kinds of things that help me get my work done. And at the same time, I'm witnessing things that 3 or 4 years ago we had no language around. We didn't know what slop was. We didn't know what a hallucination is. We had never thought about AI psychosis. We had never thought about prompt injections. We didn't know what a prompt was. Like all of these things are new words, new concepts for us, right? All of the ones that I've named right now, except for prompt maybe, are words that describe something that is problematic in its impact on the user that's using the system. And when you look a little bit deeper underneath something like slop is nothing else but an output that you don't trust to be good. A hallucination is an output that you don't trust to be correct. When you look at AI psychosis, you have a system acting in a way that eggs a person on in a direction that harms their mental health. When you have a prompt injection, you get a system to do something untrustworthy. So in all of these instances, there's some trust violation in there. And when we use some of the results out of a model unquestioned without our own human judgment on top of it, and we just send them on and we try to make a strategy out of it, or we're trying to do a consulting job out of it. We've all seen the news around big consultancies getting in trouble because the report they gave to clients still said the little disclaimer at the bottom, did you like this response, yes or no, which indicates clearly it's been a copy paste from something. All of these are little trust violations, right? Customers don't want to pay a big consultancy for a report that they could have just pulled out of Claude themselves. If you build a strategy that's completely misguided because it makes up context that isn't your company's context, is actually not a trustworthy recommendation. It sounds trustworthy because AI is pretty good at making confident sounding statements that at face value, at first thought, look like they might be trustworthy and they're really not. So it's messing with our perception of what kind of language we feel like we can trust, or who you think you could be trusting. Think back 5 years ago, if someone sent you a polished deck with smart sounding confident statements in it, the only way this person could have done this is by either writing them themselves or getting someone to do it for them. And in any way, there was someone really thinking about it. And you could trust that these polished statements were some sort of an indicator for intelligence and correctness. No longer the case. And so we have to figure out ways, how do we work with all of these instances of us having to check and double check and make sure that it goes in the right direction. And it's kind of funny to me because Stephen Covey was writing the book on the speed of trust many years ago, and his main argument was when trust is at play, it speeds things up massively because you can rely on whatever someone is sending to you. You can know that if this person makes a commitment, they will actually follow through. You can know that if this person says they can do it, they will actually do it, and they have the skills and capabilities to deliver this. Now we're kind of like in this moment where we say, oh, we have to put a human in the loop. We have to check this. We have to check that. We have to keep checking things that no one made intentionally, and it actually slows us down. So I don't know that there's so much of it feels so fast to ask an AI to give me this position, give me this paper, give me this thought. But then it actually takes quite a bit of skill, knowledge, and focus to get it right. Is it in the end that much faster? Is it in the end making us smarter, or are we having a little bit of a skill atrophy moment here where we're relying on these tools? And right now, if we've been around the block for 20 plus years, we may have good judgment skills on these outputs and can say, oh, this is not good enough. It's not what I intended. I know it can be done better. I'll reprompt, versus someone takes this first result and says, oh, it sounds smart. Let me send it on. So there's like all of these things at play. And that's what I've been talking about at Mind the Product. And I brought in then these examples of where things went south, like what happened in South Korea with Starbucks, where somebody used an AI tool and created a marketing campaign. And I can like vividly picture how this goes. Give me a culturally relevant day. Okay, Tank Day, right? It is culturally relevant, not because it's something to celebrate, but it is a difficult moment in their culture. Give me a statement that relates to Tank Day. That's a slogan we can use for a marketing campaign. Okay, let's track the desk, which was like part of the story of covering up police abuse. And then you make a marketing campaign out of it and you send it on, and nobody opens that email to check whether that marketing campaign was okay to go. And it goes all the way into production, and then customers get super mad. Losing a quarter of your revenue in 1 week, getting Starbucks headquarter in Seattle to say you're tarnishing our global brand. By the way, in our licensing agreement with you, it means that we can take the brand back from you 35%, the current trading value of this org. The stock price dropped of the holding company that owns that license, and the CEO got sacked. All because somebody made an untrustworthy choice using an AI tool. This isn't even building an AI product. But you can imagine like a user coming into your chatbot asking for something. You've seen it when I think it was a Canadian airline that had to honor a free flight ticket that the chatbot promised to the customer. But can this bot be abused to do horrific things? There's so much risk in all of this, and that's been what I've been addressing in this talk. And my point was, the only way you can kind of get on top of this is you have to have an idea of what is my vision for positive impact in the world. You have to have an approach to how you govern trustworthiness. And only in this combination can you make sure that your revenue impact is hopefully positive and not negative as a result of you employing these systems at scale with your customers. If you have no intentional approach around this, you're just sitting on a risk machine.
Yeah. And I think it's like what really gets me coming from product operations, and I like for people who may not have this context, Simonetta and I both were part of the creation of the Makers Manifesto that hopes to address, right, some of these challenges, what will persist and what will change now and in the future as we build together with AI. And I think one of the things that struck me as we were in that workshop room, sort of trying to figure out, okay, what principles would really be useful for all of us. I think it's the fact that you need to bake this into the organization so that you can actually go back to trusting the org, right? If we truly envision a future where part of our team members are agents, we need to be able to trust that their output is at least good enough for us to proceed, right? Because it's exactly as you said, Simonetta, if you do this one thing very fast, but then you have to spend 45 minutes figuring out whether you can use it, whether it's trustworthy, whether it's in line with your strategy, whether it actually helps you move forward, you have not meaningfully gained any speed. So this idea of baking in trust, baking in risk guardrails, being able to say, hey, over here in this playground, sure, be risky, push things to production. It has a very small footprint, let us know what you're doing, but there's a limited amount that this can harm our business. Over there, let's say with our payments or with our communication, how we show up in the world, that is an absolute no-go. This is where we need to have people in charge all the time, right? And I love that you're bringing concrete examples of when this has already gone wrong, because I think we are actually still at the point where it's a little easy to hand wave this. It's a little easy to go, yeah, but nothing's gonna happen. Nothing's really gonna happen. Let's just see what the AI does. Let's push it to prod and then we'll figure it out. And I think we need to be really explicit in what can and what does happen when that trust is broken down, both internally, organizationally, right? This is something that was hand waved by so many different people. I mean, the chain that is required for a Starbucks marketing campaign like that must be immense, right? And not a single person caught it. But also externally, when people are now holding companies accountable for the AI in their products, right? There was a landmark ruling that said Google is actually responsible for what the AI summary said. That's really important.
There's some interesting things that you've both really well touched on. And there's a thought process that I've had for quite a while now in the use of AI. It doesn't matter if you're using it as a business, as a thought, or whether you're personally using it to, for your own purposes or whatever, is treating it like a junior. So in the context of using AI outputs and working with it, training it like a junior in your role, like an intern or somebody like that really doesn't know much about anything to start with, and you have to train it. And why am I saying that? Is because that's the mindset that you should use in terms of your trust and how that trust can grow. As it learns more about you and your business and it gets more accurate, then that level of trust can start to grow. Now, whether you ever get to the point whereby you completely trust it, as potentially in that Starbucks example, is a whole other piece. But actually, that's how I've been treating it in terms of I don't trust your output. And so with that in mind, the cost of using AI is then in a similar proportion as to, well, if I'm bringing on a junior or an intern, I have to spend more of my time reviewing their work and working with them than I would do for maybe a senior that comes in that can just go in and start from, in the deep end. So it's a mindset shift that we surely have to be taking with our use of AI. And with that as well is, what are we doing with that? Antonio, on your piece there about kind of, are we having agentic kind of work colleagues and using it in that way as well? Fantastic. Where are we right now? So many people are using it to just shortcut, to cut down on their workloads, to actually, I'm using this to put things in, word things in a much better way than I'm potentially capable of doing to make me look better, for my own ego, to win that promotion, etc., etc. So we're not really having the right mindset of how to integrate this into our businesses anyway. And so it all just trickles down to the theme of this episode, which has been the trust in the use of AI.
But I feel we're kind of also at this moment where I'm starting to see better approaches emerge, right? We kind of started out with this idea 3 years ago when ChatGPT came out. Yes, this thing hallucinates. Yes, it'll get better. And then every subsequent model also did get better. And they had this hope that by scaling, by just bringing in more training data, the trustworthiness problem would go away. That for a while, that was the promise that was made, that most of us believed that this would be the worst model that we've ever worked with, and the next one will be substantially better. And to some degree, that's true, right? And models have become more capable. The whole advent of agentic workflows and things added additional functionality and things on top of what an LLM that you just interact with in one chat can do. I think there's also promise in when I look at specifically how agentic engineering and how people are building these like coding factories around really good rule set. And I think our colleagues in engineering have been quite diligent at things like creating architecture decision logic documents, creating coding style definitions, creating all these artifacts that help them keep their code clean, everything they're doing around unit testing, everything they're doing around linting, and all of these ways that help explicitly describe what good code looks like. And we have been not very diligent in writing up these things in the product trade. It mostly lived in our heads, right? Equivalent things that should live in the context of an agentic system that product people are using for all the things we are doing, and probably arguably a marketing team and others should be having the same access to, is explicit description of our strategy, explicit description of the product principles that we are using. If you have to choose between this and that, then this over this, right? What is our vision? What is our ideal customer profile? How do we describe what it is that we want? What is it that we don't want? Everything around evals, everything around guardrails, those are topics that are top of mind for people who work as PMs on AI experiences. And I want to kind of mention again Lara Stewart Miller and her prompt ledger logic, where she really went into tangible things like authorizations with a principle around least privilege by design, access is earned, not assumed, or that you put operational controls around things, and the principle being that operational power must always be bounded and controllable, or around consent and context, consent must be informed, specific, and revocable. Everything around explicability and all these things there are now principled, explicit things emerging that we could put in the context of an agentic system. And the good news is, one thing that we've always struggled with our human colleagues is, let's say we come up with a strategy and the CEO presents the strategy to the team, and some people are out sick and some people don't pay attention and some people simply don't understand it or whatever. Somehow, although the thing gets communicated, it doesn't actually land in the consciousness of people in the team. But we can upload such a document, if it's well crafted, into the context of agents that are used company-wide. Now, with that comes the benefit of every agent in the company now has this piece of information, and the struggle or challenge that if it's wrong, all the agents in the entire org are making decisions based on a flawed principle or strategy or whatever. But I find this interesting because I think we're going to see a lot more focus in how do we share context around strategy? How do we share context around our business model? How do we share context around these are the delighters for our customers with agentic co-creators successfully across many teams all at the same time? And there is now this tool in the form of agent context that can get this done. Now we're starting to think about, and how do we update this? Who has authority to make an update to this? I think we're going to change our ways of working around these things, but they will be needed because otherwise, what Antonia said earlier, agents will just make stuff up, and we don't want them to make stuff up because that's where they could go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Who knew after all this time that communication and documentation were important all along?
Who knew? And it's really strange, isn't it? And we are out of time now, but just passing thought on that is, do you remember kind of 10 years ago when everyone was like, oh, documentation, no, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't need documentation for anything, you know?
No one's going to read it anyway.
read it. What's the point in having a big manual and things like that? Products should be, really easy to use. You don't need documentation. We shouldn't need it because it should be so straightforward and simple. And then all of a sudden we need documentation again. Who knew? We are massively out of time. We are over time, in fact. I think this is the first time in a long time I've looked up to the clock. And I'm like, my God, we are out of time. There's so much we have covered on a variety of different topics today. So Simonetta, thank you so much for joining us today and everything you shared.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our audience, thank you to everybody watching today. Antonia and I will be back on the next episode of the Product Opscast. Thank you. Take care.